Hey friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be doing a reading wrap up for all of 2022 because I did not get that much reading done this year. I read 19 books, including the one I finished last night, and I don't think I'm going to have much time to finish another book. I might finish like one more book before the end of the year, but I figure we're close enough to the end of the year that I can just do the reading wrap up. So it's going to be a bit of a longer video, I think. I'm going to give a summary and a review for each of the 19 books. Well, not quite each of the 19 books. Four of them are in one series, so I'm only going to give a review for the whole series. So the first book that I read in 2022 was Enchantments, A Modern Witch's Guide to Self-Possession by Maya Spalter. So this is basically a basics on how to be a witch, how to build an altar, things like that, and it's written by an employee at one of New York's oldest occult shops. I gave this book 4 stars. I was on a bit of a spirituality kick at the beginning of the year, so that's why I read it. I wanted to read more about different things like having to do with spirituality and being a witch and Wicca and all that kind of stuff. It was a very easy read and had a lot of interesting instructions and guides on how to kind of incorporate magic into your own life, which I found very interesting. The second book that I read in 2022 is Artemis by Andy Weir. This book is about a girl named Jazz, who is a simple contraband smuggler in Artemis, which is the first colony city based on the moon. She ends up getting offered a job to pull off a huge heist for a huge payday, but ends up getting pulled into schemes that are much bigger than the plans that she has for herself. I rated this book 5 stars, and I really love this main character and her attitude. She was very sassy and independent. There was really good sci-fi world building, and the way that they explained the city and the way that it works was very interesting and made a lot of sense. And there are lots of twists and turns without it being too confusing, which I find very helpful. The third book I read in 2022 was A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. This book tells the origin story of the greatest sorcerer in the world, Jed, who was originally named Sparrowhawk in his youth. Basically his troublemaking school days and the years afterwards. He got himself into some serious magical trouble, and it's all about him trying to figure out how to get himself out. I rated this book 2 stars. I found it to be extremely dull. I didn't find wasn't very much action or anything like that going on. It spent a lot of time describing things about the story that really didn't matter, like lots of inane details. And I had no connection to the main character at all. I didn't feel for them. I didn't have any empathy for them. I kind of just read about them. The next book that I read in 2022 is We All Fall Down by Natalie D. Richards. This is a story about 2 friends that secretly have a crush on each other, and the night that Theo, one of the friends, decides to tell Paige, he instead gets into a fight at a party and accidentally punches Paige in the face. Basically, the story tells the aftermath of that event and the strange happenings that keep bringing them back to that place. I rated this book 5 stars. I read it in one sitting overnight, so it's a very easy read, but also very immersive. It had some kind of weird story aspects to it, but I did find it very interesting, and you really ended up feeling for the characters and rooting for them to kind of succeed in their own ways. Next, I read Born by Jeff Vandermeer. It takes place in the ruins of an unnamed city sometime in the future. It tells the story of a scavenger named Rachel who comes across a strange creature named Born that she takes under her wing in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. I read this book 4 stars. It was a really, really weird book. It was very strange. It's very difficult to describe or to review, but I did find myself very intrigued in the story and wanting to know what happens next. So it was a very interesting book. Next, I read Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. So this takes place in an alternate universe where black people, known as crosses, are the majority, and white people, known as noughts, are the minority. As opposed to in our world where it's the opposite. It tells the story of the relationship between a cross and a knot throughout their life as they try to navigate racism. I only rated this book 2 stars. I really didn't enjoy it that much. I didn't care for the characters at all, and I thought that the ending was extremely weird and didn't really make a lot of sense at all. Next, I read The Bone Spindle by Leslie Vedder. It's a retelling of Sleeping Beauty with a gender swap. It's a sleeping prince instead of a princess. It also tells the story of Fee, the bookish treasure hunter, and Shane, the rugged warrior, and how they must work together, because one day Fee accidentally pricks her finger on a spindle, causing her to become the chosen one to save the land they live in, and break the curse that is causing the prince to be under a magical sleep. I rated this book 5 stars. It was great action with a good story to back it up. The main characters were easy to empathize with, and we really ended up rooting for them. And I'm really excited for the sequel. The next book that I read was Iron Widow by Jiren J. Zhao. This takes place in a world under which they are constantly under attack from giant mecha aliens that can only be fought by things called chrysalises. These chrysalises are mechs piloted by a man, and they have a co-pilot that is a woman. However, the woman almost always dies during battle because of the mental strain that the battle causes. And this is just like an accepted part of the battle. Enter Zitian, a girl who applies to be a co-pilot because she wants to assassinate a pilot who was the cause of her sister's death, but ends up being discovered as one of the most powerful lead pilots, known as an Iron Widow. I rated this book 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed this book. There was a lot of really great action and adventure going on. I really loved the main character. She was an actual strong female lead who had lots of ambition and power and did exactly what she wanted when she wanted to. This book also has really great bisexual and polyamory representation. Next book I read was Invisible Girl by Lisa Jewell. So this book kind of follows a couple different stories at once. One of them is Owen Pick, who is a teacher accused of sexual misconduct, and while off work, finds himself browsing the internet and comes across the dark underworld of incel forums. But it also tells the story of the family across the street, who doesn't like Owen and think he's creepy, and how one of the father's patients, he's a child psychologist, has gone missing. I rated this book 4 stars. I thought it was very interesting and a thrilling book. There is a lot of different points of view that it jumps around between, which can get a little bit confusing, but there's characters that you really just fall in love with and end up wanting to root for. The next book that I read was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This story is of Stella Lane, who is a woman on the autistic spectrum who is basically disgusted by sex and kissing. But she wants more experience in that area because she does eventually want to get married and have children. So she hires an escort named Michael Fan to teach her the ins and outs. Phrasing. And suddenly she finds that she's not so disgusted by it when it's done right. I rated this book 5 stars. It is extremely spicy, so reader discretion is advised. But they had great characters, a great story, and you really ended up falling in love with the characters. The next books that I read was Heartstopper Volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4 by Alice Oseman. The main characters in these stories is Charlie, who is an openly gay, overthinking outcast, and Nick, a popular rugby-playing jock. They meet in homeroom and become friends, but meanwhile, Charlie is totally falling for seemingly straight Nick. I rate all of these books 5 stars. They are just so sweet and lovely, and I find myself actually giggling to myself out loud while I'm reading them and like smiling and blushing. You will totally fall in love with these characters and their story. It's just so sweet. The next book that I read was How to Keep House While Drowning, A Gentle Approach to Cleaning and Organizing by Casey Davis. This is a self-help book for those struggling to keeping up with chores and care tasks. It helps with the feeling of guilt when you are struggling to keep up with those things, and tips and tricks to make housework more manageable. I rated this book 4 stars. It really helped me understand kind of more about myself and the reasons why I struggle with keeping up with house care and stuff like that. It made me feel better and more capable. It also has a lot of easy to follow ideas and schedules to make life easier for you. Next, I read Verity by Colleen Hoover. This is a story of Loan, who is a struggling author not getting any work until she is offered the job of a lifetime by the husband of a famous author who wants Loan to finish his wife's work because she has been injured beyond the ability to write it herself. Loan moves into their house for a couple days to go through the author's notes in her office. When she finds a manuscript that the author wrote that is full of terrible confessions from the author's life. I rate this book 4 stars. It was very chilling and thrilling. It was full of twists and turns that I found myself wanting to know what happened next. And there is a really, really great twist at the end that kind of throws you for a loop. Next, I read Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. It takes place in a fantasy land called Ravka, a nation divided by something called the Shadowfold, which is an abyss of darkness full of monsters that stretches across the nation in the middle. This tells the story of Alina, an orphan working as a map maker, who's traveling through the fold when she is attacked, and as her best friend is possibly fatally wounded, she uncovers that she has a dormant power that may be strong enough to defeat the whole Shadowfold itself. I rated this book 5 stars. It's a classic. Small nobody turns out to be the chosen one who is meant to save the entire world. There is a touch of romance thrown in to a larger narrative, and there's a lot of great action, and I really love the story. Second last book that I read was Five Total Strangers by Natalie D. Richards. This tells the story of Mira, who is stranded at the airport because of a blizzard when her seatmate offers her a ride in a rental car she managed to get. She ends up riding with 3 other passengers, all of which are complete and total strangers to each other. As they drive through the storm, mysterious events start happening, things start going missing, and it seems that somebody is trying to sabotage this trip. I rated this 4 stars. It does take place almost entirely within one car as they travel together on the road, so it's a bit of an awkward narrative. But it is definitely twisty and turny, and you're always wondering what's going to happen next. And you do end up with really in-depth characters, considering they're all strangers to each other. And finally, last night I finished reading One Last Stop by Katie McQuiston. August has just moved to New York City for the first time and is trying to make it on her own when she meets a beautiful young woman named Jane on the train and starts to get to know her. However, it turns out that Jane is not what she seems and is actually from the 1970s and was dislodged from time and is now stuck on the Q train forever. I rated this book 5 stars. It made me laugh. It made me cry. It was a lovely story of found family and queer love. And it's kind of long for what it is. I found it really hard to get through, but it is worth it in the end. Okay, so that is all 19 books that I read this year, and a little bit of a review for each of them and a rating. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will be doing, hopefully next year I will be doing monthly reading wrap-ups instead of whole year, so the videos will be a little bit shorter, but yeah, look forward to that. Also, if you have any book recommendations, please leave them in the comments. I would love to hear. I'm always looking for new books to read, so if there's any books that you think I would like based on how I rated these books, let me know. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Later days.